I woke just before sunrise. The light streaming through my cabin's windows usually soothed me, but not this morning. My name is Ethan Marshall. I've been many things in life: a small-town lawyer, a devoted father, and now the newly appointed chief prosecutor for Lakeshore County. But as I blinked away grogginess and gazed across the shimmering lake that fronted my family's retreat, I noticed something impossible to ignore. Bulldozers. Yes, actual bulldozers, intruding on the tranquil shoreline like mechanical beasts in a peaceful meadow. I threw on jeans and a flannel, heart hammering with disbelief. My lakeside retreat was supposed to be private land, a place of serenity inherited from my late grandmother. She had cherished these woods, these waters, more than anything. Never did I imagine someone would bulldoze the bank for a construction project I hadn't authorized. I hopped onto my ATV and tore down the dirt path winding through tall pines. The crisp morning air stung my cheeks, fueling my rising anger. As I rounded a bend, the roar of machinery grew louder, accompanied by the clang of metal on stone. Finally, the trees parted, revealing a monstrous sight. A half-finished pier jutted into the lake, piles of lumber and steel rods stacked along the shore. A row of trucks lined a makeshift road, and dozens of workers in neon vests busily hammered, drilled, and assembled what looked like resort facilities. My jaw dropped. This wasn't some casual improvement on the shoreline. This was a full-scale commercial build, complete with signage that read, Lakeside Lux Resort, an exclusive HOA project. Exclusive resort? HOA project? On my personal land? Heart pounding, I cut the ATV's engine and stormed toward a cluster of trailers that seemed to serve as temporary offices. Two men in hard hats eyed me, one stepping forward as if to block my path. "Sir, this is a restricted area for authorized personnel only," he said in a bored tone. "Authorize?" I echoed, voice trembling with fury. "I own this land, and I sure as hell didn't authorize any resort." He froze, uncertain. Before he could respond, a figure in a crisp navy suit emerged from one of the trailers. A tall woman with sharp features and dark hair pinned neatly back. She approached, wearing an expression of polite condescension, her name badge proclaiming, Melissa Rayburn, President, Lake Haven Shores, HOA. "Is there a problem?" she asked smoothly, though her eyes flicked over me like I was an unruly trespasser. I clenched my fists. "Yes, there's a problem, Ms. Rayburn," I spat. "You're building a resort on my lakeside property. Care to explain how that happened, given that I never sold or leased you anything?" Melissa arched an eyebrow, checking her clipboard. "Our records show that Lake Haven Shores HOA purchased the lakeside tract last fall. We have county approval for a private retreat, only accessible to members and their guests." She gave me a tight-lipped smile. "If you claim ownership, I'd suggest you speak to our attorneys, but please, don't interfere with ongoing construction." A surge of disbelief mingled with fury in my chest. Last fall, I had been finalizing my appointment as chief prosecutor, too swamped to visit the cabin regularly. Could someone have forged my signature or manipulated the property records? Did my grandmother's documents somehow get tampered with after her passing? I took a deep breath. "Stop everything," I warned, "or you'll face immediate legal ramifications. This is my family land, and I can prove it." Melissa's composure didn't waver. "We have all the permits we need. We're on a tight schedule. If you have complaints, file them in court." Then, in a chillingly dismissive tone, she added, "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting with the site foreman." My blood boiled. I nearly shouted that I was the new chief prosecutor, with the power to indict them if they'd done anything illegal. but I forced myself to remain calm. Let them think they could ignore me. Let them keep building. I needed to gather facts first, craft an airtight case, because once I showed them who they'd challenged, I'd bring down the full weight of the law on this unscrupulous HOA. I raced my ATV back to the cabin, no sense haranguing workers who were just following orders. Once inside, I pored over old manila folders containing the property deeds, boundary maps, and my grandmother's carefully signed documents. The original deed was clear. She'd left the entire Lakeside tract to me, complete with a 100-yard stretch of shoreline. No mention of any sale or HOA agreement. The sense of violation coursed through my veins. If they truly believed they had a legal claim, either they were incompetent or, more likely, someone had forged or manipulated the records. I hopped into my pickup truck and sped toward the Lakeshore County Recorder's office, the seat of local property documentation. Arriving, I dashed inside, heart pounding. The clerk, an older woman named Doris, greeted me warmly, though her brow furrowed when I asked for the property file on my Lakeside parcel. Within minutes, she flipped through digital records, then frowned deeply. "That's odd," Doris murmured. "It shows a transaction 6 months ago transferring partial ownership of your land to Lake Haven Shores HOA. Did you co-sign a joint development agreement?" I shook my head vehemently. "Absolutely not." She scanned the file further, lips pursed. "The documents here are notarized, but the signature doesn't quite match your older ones. There's a variance." Anger flared in my gut. Variance? More like forgery. I inhaled, trying to keep calm. "Doris, I'm going to need certified copies of everything. I suspect fraud." Her eyes flicked up, sympathy in her gaze. "Of course, Ethan. Or should I call you Chief Prosecutor now?" She gave a little smile, but it faded quickly at my grim expression. "Sorry, this must be awful." "It is," I said softly, taking the paperwork she printed. "Thank you. I promise. Heads are going to roll for this." Stepping out into the bright midday sun, I gripped the documents like a lifeline. Fraud was a felony, and if Lake Haven Shores HOA conspired to steal my property, I'd relish prosecuting them personally. But first, I needed more evidence. Any sign that they bribed officials or manipulated the notary. Because if they'd gone so far as to build a massive lakeside resort, they likely had allies in high places. My new role as chief prosecutor put me in a prime position to expose them, but it also meant they might anticipate my legal moves. I slid behind the wheel of my truck, resting my head against the steering for a moment. My grandmother's face floated across my memory. She'd always said the lake was magical, a place for reflection and renewal. Now it was marred by an HOA's greed. I gritted my teeth, determination surging. I'd tear down every false claim they'd concocted. Back at the Lakeshore County Courthouse, I entered my new office, a space I was still settling into, boxes half unpacked, law books in disarray. My deputy, Allison Grant, a capable woman with a keen sense of justice, looked up from her desk. "You look upset, boss. Everything okay?" I gave a short laugh, though no humor touched my eyes. "Not at all. The Lake Haven Shores HOA is building a resort on my private land." Her jaw dropped, and I handed her the suspicious deed copies. "I suspect forgery." She scanned the pages, a slow burn of anger crossing her features. "These signatures don't match your usual style. The notary's stamp also looks off. We could bring in a forensic document analyst." I nodded. "Yes, do that. And also see if Lake Haven Shores filed any special requests with the county planning board." They must have needed building permits. Allison tapped at her keyboard. Let's see. They applied for a community recreational complex permit, approved 2 months ago under the premise that they own the Lakeside property. No major opposition was recorded. She frowned. It moved through unusually fast. My suspicion deepened. Sounds like they have friends on the board or the inside track, or they greased palms. Either way, we'll find out. I clenched my jaw. Normally, as chief prosecutor, I delegate a lot of tasks, but this case is personal. I'm not recusing myself. If they want to fight, they have it. Allison offered a tight smile. I'll gather everything we can. We'll see who signed off on these permits and how. Meanwhile, do you want me to alert the sheriff? I paused, considering. Let's hold off on a direct confrontation, for now. We'll build our case quietly. The moment we have enough, we'll file for an injunction or even criminal charges. An image of bulldozers ripping through the lakeshore flashed in my mind, fueling my resolve. They picked the wrong land to steal. Allison nodded briskly, already dialing contacts for further records. I sank into my desk chair, mind churning with what-ifs. The path forward might be messy. OA lawyers, political maneuvering, potential sabotage. But if they believed I'd roll over, they misunderstood me entirely. This was no ordinary property dispute. I was a prosecutor with the full force of local law at my disposal. I'd ensure they learned a harsh lesson about trespassing on a marshal's land. Late that afternoon, I drove to Crescent Lake Historical Society, hoping to glean more about the property's significance. My grandmother once mentioned the shoreline contained wetlands and was a habitat for endangered birds. If so, Lake Haven Shores needed environmental clearances to build a sprawling resort. If they bypassed that too, we had them cornered. Inside the Society's quaint office, I met Marjorie Phillips, a retired teacher who volunteered as an archivist. She brightened when I explained my predicament. Your grandmother often donated to our conservation fund, she said, ushering me toward a file cabinet. She was passionate about preserving the lake's natural beauty. I'm sure she'd be appalled by a commercial resort. Marjorie produced a thick folder labeled Marshall Lakeside Tract. Flipping through, I spotted references to wetlands designated as sensitive. My heart fluttered with renewed hope. If they're building on wetlands, that's a federal issue. No way they can proceed without Army Corps of Engineers approval or a state environmental review. Marjorie gave a knowing nod. Precisely. We've had many local disputes about developing the lakeshore. Usually it's a drawn-out process. Surprising that a brand new resort popped up so quickly. I snapped photos of the relevant pages, mentally adding them to my growing arsenal. Thank you, Marjorie. This might help me stop them before they cause irreversible harm. Before I left, she patted my arm gently. Your grandmother would be proud you're fighting for the place she loved. Don't let them tarnish it. I offered a grateful smile, stepping out into the golden afternoon light. With each new discovery, faulty permits, suspicious deed, wetlands protection, the case against Lake Haven Shores solidified. Sure, they might brandish high-powered attorneys or claim ignorance, but soon they'd face something far worse than a few lawsuits. Me, armed with the law, the environment, and the memory of my grandmother spurring me on. 2 days later, I ventured back to the site. The construction had advanced alarmingly. A skeleton of a large lodge building now rose near the water, scaffolding hugging its frame, more trucks, more workers. My stomach churned at the transformation. The lake's once pristine shoreline marred by steel beams and churned-up dirt. This madness had to be halted soon, or the damage might be irreversible. As I approached, security again tried to bar my way. This time, a heated argument ensued until a foreman hurried over, eyeing me warily. "Look, we're just doing our jobs," he said. "If you want to talk, see Miss Rayborn." "Where is she?" I demanded. He nodded toward a half-finished walkway leading to the lodge. My anger flared. Without waiting, I pushed past the guard, striding across planks that creaked underfoot. Sawdust hung heavy in the air, and the hum of a power generator drowned out distant birdsong. My grandmother's gentle lake felt miles away, replaced by a cacophonous construction zone. I found Melissa Rayburn near a blueprint table, conferring with a well-dressed man, likely an architect or project manager. When she spotted me, annoyance flickered across her face. "We can't keep doing this dance, Mr. Marshall," she said, forcing an icy smile. "We're on a tight timetable." My gaze raked over the blueprints. "And I'm on a tight timetable to shut you down. This land is private, the wetlands are protected, and your deed is fraudulent." A hush fell between us, tension crackling. Finally, she cleared her throat. "We have a legal team who'll prove otherwise. If you keep interfering, we'll file harassment charges. And just so you know, Lake Haven Shores has considerable influence in local government. You're out of your league, sir." A flash of grim amusement coursed through me. If she only knew I was the new chief prosecutor, holding the power to indict. But I kept that detail tucked away a bit longer, wanting to see if she'd threaten me further. I squared my shoulders. "We'll see who's out of their league. I have enough evidence to bury this project. Either you voluntarily halt construction, or you'll face court orders and possibly criminal prosecution." She scoffed. "Overblown threats? We've done nothing illegal." Her arrogance was staggering. "You'll regret underestimating me," I warned softly. "Next time we speak, it'll be in a courtroom." Turning on my heel, I left before the urge to fling her blueprint table into the lake overcame me. The time for talk was nearly over. Soon, I'd file legal motions, brandish the law, and break this unscrupulous project. Let her keep building illusions of success. In a matter of days, we'd see how quickly that lodge would become a half-finished relic of their hubris. Back at the prosecutor's office, Allison Grant compiled a formidable dossier. We had suspicious deed. Forensic analysts confirmed my signature was forged. Wetlands. The lake's shoreline included a protected zone, requiring federal oversight. No evidence Lake Haven Shores secured such clearance. Permit irregularities. The local planning board had rushed approval under questionable circumstances. Notary inconsistencies. The notary stamp used on the deed didn't match official records, possibly an unlicensed or complicit notary. Joel Henderson, the county's top environmental lawyer, joined us for a meeting. He scanned the files with a low whistle. "This is strong. We can file an immediate injunction in civil court to freeze construction. Also, the environmental angle might pull in state or even federal authorities." I felt a measure of triumph, though tinged with anxious energy. Yes, let's do it. The longer they build, the worse it gets. I want a stop work order within days. Joel nodded. "We'll push for an emergency hearing. Meanwhile, as the chief prosecutor, you can decide if criminal charges are warranted. Conspiracy to commit fraud, forging land deeds, ignoring environmental laws. It's quite the list." Allison's eyes gleamed. "We'll see if Ms. Rayburn's so confident once she's facing felony charges." A flicker of caution rose in me. "We have to do this by the book. No corner cutting. If they suspect a vendetta, they might claim I'm abusing my position." My gaze hardened. "But we'll make sure every T is crossed, every step legal. Then there'll be no escape for them." The plan formed. Within 48 hours, Joel would file civil motions. If granted, the court would slam the brakes on Lake Haven Shore's so-called resort. Meanwhile, I'd quietly open a criminal investigation. If I uncovered direct involvement by Ms. Rayburn or her allies in forging the deed or bribing officials, indictments would follow. Let them see the power of a determined prosecutor with right on his side. That night, after finishing the day's tasks, I visited my cabin, exhaustion weighing on me. Stepping onto the porch, I looked across the moonlit water, a sorrowful hush settling over me. The sound of distant construction was faint but ever present. My mind drifted to memories of fishing with my grandmother, her laughter echoing amid the pines. I promised her silently I'd restore our retreat, no matter the cost. 3 days later, we secured an emergency hearing at the Lakeshore County Courthouse. Word had spread quickly about the forged deed allegations and the environmental concerns. Reporters lined the steps, eager for a sensational story. A powerful HOA building an exclusive lakeside resort pitted against a landowner who happened to be the new chief prosecutor. Talk about front-page headlines. Inside, I sat beside Joel Henderson at the plaintiff's table scanning the gallery. My mother, bless her, had shown up for moral support, tears brimming at the thought of her mother's beloved lake threatened. Allison hovered behind us, poised with folders of evidence. On the defense side sat Ms. Rayburn, looking stoic in a tailored suit, flanked by 2 attorneys. I caught her glare across the aisle, but I refused to acknowledge it. The judge, a gruff yet fair man named Judge Whitcomb, convened the session. Joel rose, delivering a concise yet devastating argument. My rightful ownership, the suspicious deed, the absent environmental permits, and the irreversible damage being done to the shore. He requested an immediate injunction to halt all work. Lake Haven Shore's lead attorney tried to spin a tale of valid transactions, insinuating I had sold partial rights and then changed my mind. They claimed the wetlands were minor, unworthy of federal concern, and that the project was nearly complete. The more they spoke, the more I sensed they'd come unprepared for the depth of our evidence. Joel calmly presented the notarized signature analysis, the documentation from the Historical Society detailing the protected ecosystem. The defense attorneys looked rattled, flipping through their own papers as if searching for a miracle. Finally, the judge leaned forward, fingers steepled. Lake Haven Shores, you claim legitimate ownership, yet we have tangible proof of a forged signature. Have you an explanation for that discrepancy? Their attorney stuttered something about clerical oversight, but it rang hollow. Ms. Rayburn's cool facade cracked a little, her mouth tightening. A hush fell over the courtroom. Judge Whitcomb drummed his fingers. I find the plaintiff's evidence compelling. Effective immediately, I grant a preliminary injunction to cease all construction on the disputed property. We'll conduct a full review to determine rightful ownership and environmental compliance. If Lake Haven Shores continues building, they'll be in contempt of court. A wave of relief flooded me. My shoulders sagged, tension ebbing away. Miss Rayburn's face reddened as cameras flashed. She stood, whispering furiously to her attorneys, who tried to placate her. The crowd buzzed, some onlookers muttering approval, others snapping photos. The gavel banged, sealing the court's decision. Outside, reporters swarmed me, microphones thrust forward. I kept my statement brief, emphasizing that the law must be respected, and I had faith the final ruling would restore my property. Ms. Rayburn pushed past the throng, refusing comment, her face a mask of frustration. I allowed myself a small, triumphant smile. The bulldozers would fall silent at last. Step 1 of my plan complete. With the injunction in place, Lake Haven Shores halted construction. but the fight was far from over. Ms. Rayburn scrambled to salvage her project, lodging appeals and trying to sway public opinion. She claimed I was abusing prosecutorial power to stifle development. Some local media outlets latched onto that angle, painting me as a potential bully. It stung, but I refused to stoop to petty media battles. The truth would out. Meanwhile, Allison and I pressed forward with the criminal investigation. We interviewed county clerks who processed the suspicious deed. One recalled that Ms. Rayburn personally visited, but didn't recall specifics. Another remembered being told the sale was fast-tracked due to urgent development timelines. It smelled of backroom deals. More tellingly, a county official privately confided they'd received hush money from Lake Haven Shores to expedite building permits. If we could confirm that, we'd have a corruption case too. My pulse quickened at the prospect. Ms. Rayburn and her cronies might face not just civil liability, but jail time. One afternoon, as I was reviewing depositions, the phone on my desk buzzed. A trembling voice asked for me. "This is Diane Matthews," the woman said quietly. I was Lake Haven Shores' treasurer. I can't keep quiet anymore. They threatened me if I spoke out, but I want to come clean about the forged deed and the bribes. My heart leapt. Diane, you're doing the right thing. We can protect you if you have evidence. Are you willing to give a formal statement? She exhaled shakily. Yes. I'll bring copies of the internal memos, the bank transfers. I'm done being part of their scheme. We arranged a meeting after hours at my office to keep it discreet. If Diane's testimony panned out, it could be the smoking gun that not only secured my property, but also took down Miss Rayburn's entire operation. However, part of me worried for Diane's safety. People who blow the whistle on powerful HOAs can face fierce retaliation. I promised we'd keep it confidential as possible. That night, I paced my desk, restless with anticipation. If Ms. Rayburn discovered this defection, she'd be furious. Possibly dangerous. But I had no intention of letting her intimidation succeed. This land was my birthright, and Miss Rayburn's arrogance was about to meet the unstoppable force of truth. At 8:30, Diane Matthews arrived clutching a battered briefcase. She was a petite woman, eyes darting nervously as Allison welcomed her in. Over the next hour, Diane spilled everything. Ms. Rayburn and a small circle within Lake Haven Shores had orchestrated the false deed, forging my signature with help from a crooked notary. They paid a county official to expedite environmental approvals and bury mention of wetlands. Large sums of HOA funds financed hush money for anyone who questioned the validity of their ownership. They intended to create a private, ultra-luxury resort, selling memberships at sky-high prices to wealthy out-of-towners. The local environment be damned. As Diane spoke, tears glimmered in her eyes. I never thought it would go this far. At first they said it was a harmless reallocation of land. Then I discovered the bribery and forging. I wanted out, but they threatened to ruin me. She handed me a USB drive. Here's every transaction, every email. Allison's face mirrored my mix of horror and fascination. We had them. Ms. Rayburn's involvement was undeniable. I gently placed a hand on Diane's shoulder. Thank you for coming forward. We'll ensure your safety and help you avoid legal repercussions, provided you testify truthfully. She nodded, relief mingling with fear. I just want this over. Trust me, I said, voice firm. It will be. And Ms. Rayburn's entire operation is about to collapse. Diane left under Allison's escort, wanting to avoid any watchers outside. Once alone, I scanned a few files from the USB, eyes widening at the brazen emails. Rayburn explicitly instructing staff to bury any references to wetlands, referencing EM's signature on the deed despite my name being Ethan Marshall, not EM. The smoking gun indeed. My heart thudded with satisfaction. By midnight, I'd compiled enough evidence to start drafting a motion for criminal charges: conspiracy, fraud, bribery, environmental violations. My phone buzzed occasionally with reporter calls, but I ignored them, let them wait. The next day, I'd present the evidence to a grand jury, requesting indictments. Ms. Rayburn had no idea how thoroughly she'd undone herself the moment she decided to claim the Marshall Lakeside retreat. 2 days later, the grand jury convened behind closed doors, hearing testimony from me, from Diane Matthews, from county officials who'd accepted bribes. The evidence was overwhelming. The panel asked pointed questions, each response painting Ms. Rayburn and her confederates as orchestrators of a large-scale land fraud. By day's end, the grand jury returned indictments: felony forgery, conspiracy to defraud, bribery of public officials, plus multiple environmental infractions. As the papers were signed, a hush of triumph settled over me. The next morning, a group of sheriff's deputies accompanied me to Lake Haven Shore's glitzy HQ. We marched in, heads held high, armed with arrest warrants. The staff gawked, stepping aside as I approached Ms. Rayburn's office. Her door was open, revealing her mid-conversation with a colleague. When she saw me and the deputies, color drained from her face. "Melissa Rayburn," I said formally. "You're under arrest for multiple felony counts, including conspiracy and forgery." The deputy read her rights while she stood rooted in shock. Her eyes flicked between me and the badges, as if refusing to believe it. Then, shaking with outrage, she sputtered, "You can't do this. I'm an HOA president. My board members, my attorneys." "Your attorneys can speak for you in court," I cut in coldly. "But this ends now." 2 deputies took her by the arms, leading her away. Miss Rayburn's gaze locked on me, pure venom in her eyes. You set me up. You tricked us. You never told me you were the chief prosecutor." I let out a mirthless chuckle. "You never asked, and maybe you should have checked who really owned that lakeside property. Then you'd have known you were building on a prosecutor's land." She was escorted out, cursing under her breath. The hush among the staff was palpable, some employees gaping in disbelief. The days of arrogant intimidation were over. With Ms. Rayburn and key conspirators in custody, the court swiftly upheld the injunction forbidding further construction. Over the following weeks, a flurry of lawsuits, media coverage, and condemnation from the HOA community rained down on Lake Haven shores. Residents who had invested in the exclusive resort demanded refunds. Outraged, they'd been conned into something illegal. The half-built lodge and pier now stood as a stark monument to greed and stupidity. I led the prosecution personally. We hammered every angle, ensuring Ms. Rayburn's conviction for forging the deed, bribing officials, and flouting environmental regulations. She pled not guilty initially, but, as the evidence mounted, a plea deal discussion emerged. In the end, she was sentenced to significant fines and jail time, paying hefty restitution for the damage done to my shoreline. At last, after months of chaos, I stood on the lake's edge, gazing at the battered remains of the resort infrastructure. Crews under court order began dismantling the partially built structures. Rusting steel beams were hauled away, bulldozers reversed their damage as best they could, and environmental teams stepped in to restore the wetlands. My grandmother's beloved lake breathed free once more. Friends and neighbors visited, some hugging me, others praising me for standing up to the unscrupulous HOA. I felt relief, sorrow for the scars left behind, and gratitude that justice prevailed. The lake's gentle waves lapped at the shore, whispering of renewal. With the stolen land reclaimed, I could rebuild a modest dock or simply let nature heal, preserving the retreat for future generations. Months later, life at Crescent Lake found balance again. My cabin, though overshadowed by the memory of bulldozers and legal battles, remained a refuge. The last remnants of the doomed resort project were gone, replaced by fresh plantings and a quiet hush of pine trees. I often strolled along the shore, letting the lapping water soothe my mind. News of Miss Rayburn's downfall echoed far beyond Lakeshore County. HOAs statewide took note, rethinking their expansions and checking their legal compliance. In the end, the fiasco served as a stark cautionary tale. No matter how powerful a homeowners association believed itself to be, it could not simply seize property without consequence, especially not from someone with the law behind him. One crisp autumn morning, I sat on my cabin porch, sipping coffee as the early sun set the lake ablaze with golden light. My phone buzzed with a local reporter's request for an interview, wanting a reflection on the entire saga. I declined politely. The public had enough of the story. What mattered now was peace and ensuring no such travesty happened again. I remembered Ms. Rayburn's stunned face when we arrested her, how she hissed that I'd tricked her. She never realized that the real trick was her own arrogance, never bothering to confirm who truly owned the land. She thought she could bulldoze a man's home turf for profit, never imagining she was challenging the new chief prosecutor. I exhaled, letting the crisp air fill my lungs. The lake glistened, promising a bright future for the retreat that was once at risk. My grandmother's memory lingered in every ripple, every breeze among the pines, and I silently affirmed that if any other power-hungry opportunist tried to claim this land, they too would learn the hard way that no one tramples on a martial property or on justice without dire consequences. They built an exclusive resort on my lakeside retreat, only to discover I was the new chief prosecutor, and they had no idea who they challenged until it was far too late.